Donald Trump has created a trap for himself and the door is closing fast. He has said far too much. He never knows when to stop talking. And every statement he has made about this conflict has narrowed his options further. He insisted that the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened. He insisted that enriched uranium must be surrendered. He insisted publicly and repeatedly that Iran would never be permitted to have a nuclear weapon on his watch. And on every single one of those conditions, Iran has looked Washington directly in the eye and said, no, that is our sovereign right. We are not moving. And so here we sit, trapped between the president's own words and an adversary that has no intention of flinching. Let me be precise about where we actually stand militarily, because the statements coming out of Washington bear almost no relationship to reality. We expended enormous quantities of money, missiles, and munitions in the strikes against Iran. We did not make a serious dent in Iranian defenses. Not a serious one. In the meantime, and this is the part that is genuinely disturbing to anyone who understands what it means, the Iranians have replenished their stocks and resupplied. By every credible intelligence assessment being communicated up the chain right now, Iran is in better strategic shape than it was when this war began. Think carefully about what that means. We spent all of that, and the enemy is stronger. That is not a talking point. That is the operational reality that the intelligence officers are trying to convey to people who do not want to hear it. And the reason they don't want to hear it is this. If Iran has actually grown stronger, then every additional strike is not a path to victory. It is a compounding investment in a losing position. The bill is not just what we have already spent. The bill is what it would now cost to actually achieve the objectives that were stated at the outset. And that figure is something no one in the administration is prepared to say out loud. Here is what the people making these decisions either do not understand or refuse to acknowledge about Iran. Iran's navy never consisted of a great fleet of ships. Iran has never been a maritime power in the Western sense of the word. What Iran possesses, and what has proven devastatingly effective, is a layered capability built around robotic small boats, undersea mines, and the capacity to strike anything moving through the Strait of Hormuz with tactical ballistic missiles and unmanned aerial and naval systems. There is no conventional navy to defeat. Iran hasn't had a meaningful air force since the Shah departed in 1979, so when officials stand before cameras and declare that we have defeated Iranian armed forces, those statements are not just misleading, they are strategically irrelevant. You have not solved the problem. You have not neutralized the threat to the strait. You have not changed the fundamental equation. You have simply spent a great deal of money and used a great deal of munitions, destroying things that were not the core of Iranian power. The core of Iranian power is its people, its terrain, its geography, and its institutional resilience. Iran is a nation of 93 million people. It occupies a territory roughly the size of Western Europe. It is not a flat desert with a handful of cities. It is a mountainous, complex, ancient civilizational state that has survived for thousands of years precisely because it is not easily broken. And critically, the Iranians have now had years to study exactly how the United States fights. They know where our forces deploy from. They know the weapon systems we favor. They know how we sequence our strikes, how we build our targeting packages, where the seams in our operational approach are. When your enemy knows you that well, launching new attacks is not strength. It is predictability. And predictability in combat is not something that wins wars. It is something that gets people killed for nothing. This is a pattern I have watched repeat itself throughout my career, and it predates every person currently serving in Washington. Go back to Vietnam. When American forces first landed in country with the actual mission of fighting, not advising fighting, those units did not have a clear mission. They had no defined objective to take and hold. There was a strategic decision, yes, commit American military power to stop communism in Southeast Asia. But the people implementing that decision, the commanders on the ground, could not tell you what victory looked like or how they were going to achieve it. Nobody figured it out. Not in the first year, not in the 5th year, not in the 10th year. And so we spent an astronomical sum of money. We lost tens of thousands of American lives. We killed approximately 2 million people in the process, and we left. We simply left. One would have thought, one would have hoped, That experience would have fundamentally altered how America approaches the decision to go to war. It did not. In 2001, we went into Afghanistan. There was no coherent strategy for what came after the initial military action. In 2003, we went into Iraq. Paul Wolfowitz, one of the principal architects of that decision, said it with remarkable candor at the time. We don't want to fight with the generals. We just want to get the army into Iraq. The assumption was that once the army was there, the details would work themselves out. They did not. And now we are watching the same institutional dysfunction play out against an adversary that is far more capable, far more geographically daunting, and far more strategically patient than anything we have faced since the Second World War. Donald Trump says he wants regime change. That approach failed. He says Iran must never have a nuclear weapon, and he said last June that we had obliterated their nuclear program. Less than a year later, we are told the war must resume because of that same nuclear program. Nothing changed except the price, and the price has gone up. Now I want to say something directly that virtually no mainstream platform will address: the nuclear double standard that sits at the center of this entire conflict. Israel possesses nuclear weapons. This is not a secret. This is known. Israel operates entirely outside the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel submits to none of the IAEA inspection obligations that are imposed on every other nation involved in nuclear activities. And yet the United States and Israel are conducting a regional war at extraordinary cost in blood and treasure, framed entirely around preventing Iran from having a nuclear capability. The reason this contradiction goes publicly unaddressed is the Holocaust. The modern state of Israel exists in large part as a consequence of the Holocaust, and that history has produced a political and moral framework in which the Jewish state is considered uniquely entitled to protections that are denied to all others. I understand that history. I have been to Israel many times. I do not hate Jews. I do not hate Israelis. I have never objected to helping Israel defend itself from genuine existential threats. But there is a profound and important difference between defending Israel and using American military forces to make Israel the dominant hegemon of the Middle East. We are doing the latter, and that distinction needs to be spoken plainly. What is happening right now in Lebanon must also be spoken plainly, because the American people have essentially no awareness of it. The mainstream media is not showing them what is actually occurring. What Israel is conducting in South Lebanon is what has now been aptly named Gazification, the systematic transformation of a neighboring territory into an imitation of Gaza. Villages are being leveled by controlled detonations and bulldozers, with the Israeli government providing financial incentives tied directly to the number of structures demolished. Phosphorus attacks, a weapon prohibited under international law, are occurring daily. Drone strikes are reaching Tyre and Sidon, well beyond Israel's declared operational zone. Israeli government ministers are openly and publicly calling for Israeli settlement in Lebanon. Settler-linked organizations are advertising parcels of Lebanese land online. 40 villages inside Israel's self-declared yellow zone, 7 to 10 kilometers inside Lebanese sovereign territory, have been wiped completely off the map. Since early March alone, over 100 paramedics killed, 18 hospitals bombed, more than 500 paramedics injured, 90 ambulances destroyed, thousands of civilian casualties. This is documented. The footage exists and circulates daily on open platforms, posted in many cases by Israeli accounts themselves. The American mainstream media does not show it. Understanding why requires understanding who controls the narrative infrastructure of this country. And that leads directly back to the same concentrated financial power that is simultaneously driving the demand for continued war with Iran, which brings me to the question that I believe is the most important one being avoided in Washington right now. The question is not whether Trump's decisions are rational or coherent. They are not, particularly. The question is, who is he actually serving? He has committed himself unconditionally to the Israel lobby and to the financial power that surrounds and sustains it. He has presided, whatever his campaign language suggested, over an Israel First administration. When he was asked directly whether the economic pain being experienced by ordinary Americans was influencing his willingness to reach a negotiated settlement with Iran, His answer was immediate and unambiguous, not in the slightest. He said he does not think about America's financial situation. Those were his words. I want every American to sit with that statement for a moment. The people who funded his return to the White House are at their core the forefront of the Israel lobby. He is honoring that arrangement. His loyalty in this matter is not ambiguous. The question is simply and disturbingly loyal to whom? Let me now explain why, despite the failure of the initial campaign, I believe Trump will restart this war. The logic is not military, it is psychological and political. He has made public commitments that cannot be satisfied by any diplomatic outcome Iran will accept. Iran has been explicit. The uranium stays, the strait stays under Iranian influence, full stop. Those are not negotiating positions designed to be bargained away. Those are statements of sovereign principle. Trump, on the other hand, is a man formed entirely by the Roy Cohn philosophy. You never retreat. You deny everything unfavorable. You attack relentlessly, and no matter what happens, you declare victory. The problem is that declaring victory over Iran requires something that actually resembles a victory, and that is not currently available to him. So he is caught between his own mouth and an immovable adversary. He is thrashing, and I use that word deliberately. He is thrashing around trying to find some exit from this situation that does not make him look like a man who led America into a costly, failed military adventure. That exit does not exist, and the longer he searches for it, the more the pressure builds toward the only option his psychology permits. Hit them again, harder, and hope the outcome is different this time. The consequences of another round of strikes will not be contained to the battlefield. Iran has demonstrated both the capability and the will to retaliate against the energy infrastructure of the entire Gulf region, the desalination plants, the export terminals, the pumping stations. The Gulf states know this. The Saudi Crown Prince knows it. The leadership in the Emirates knows it. I frankly find it difficult to fully credit the claim that Gulf leaders asked Trump to slow down out of concern for Iran. The Emirates Crown Prince has been among those urging the destruction of Iran. But the Saudi leadership is acutely aware of what Iranian retaliation against Gulf infrastructure would mean, not just economically, but politically. These governments could destabilize. In the Arab world, most of the elites in the Gulf are not held in high esteem by their own populations. Another devastating round of regional conflict could cost some of these leaders their positions entirely, and the global consequences would extend far beyond the Gulf. The world's civilizations run on affordable energy. When energy is no longer affordable or simply unavailable, societies do not slow down gracefully. They stop. We are talking about conditions that could produce famine in already fragile parts of the world. Economic disruption cascading through Europe, through Northeast Asia, through Japan and South Korea and Southeast Asia. A decade-long recovery period for Gulf energy infrastructure. That is the real price. Not just the missiles we have already spent, though those costs are significant, and the stockpile depletion is a serious strategic concern, but the full cascading economic consequence of what a resumed and escalated conflict would trigger. That is what the title of this conversation is really about. The $13 billion figure is a number. The actual liability is a civilization-scale disruption that nobody in Washington appears to have fully priced. There is one more dimension that is being discussed privately, but almost never publicly. Neither Russia nor China will permit Iran to be destroyed. That is not a rhetorical statement. If Iran appears to be on the verge of collapse as a functioning state, if the destruction reaches the point where regime survival is genuinely in question, Russian and Chinese intervention to prevent that outcome becomes a serious strategic probability, not a remote contingency. I have no doubt that these realities have been conveyed to Trump in his private conversations with both Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. What was said and in what terms we cannot know with certainty, but to assume those warnings have not been delivered would be profoundly naive. Let me say something about the structural rot that makes all of this possible. The rot that predates Trump and will outlast him if we do not confront it honestly. America has not truly won a major war since World War II. We came close in Korea, but that ended in an armistice. Everything since Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan has been, by any honest accounting, a strategic failure. We have been able to absorb those failures because we were sufficiently wealthy and powerful that the consequences could be managed, deferred, or simply not discussed. That margin is shrinking. We currently have roughly 250,000 troops deployed around the globe on any given day. Forces in Europe that should have come home when the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. Forces in Asia, in the Gulf, in the Caribbean. This is not strategic necessity. This is institutional inertia combined with the financial interests of a defense establishment that cannot conceive of itself without global reach. What Eisenhower warned us about before he left office, the military-industrial complex, which he originally intended to call the military-industrial congressional complex before his staff talked him out of mentioning Congress, is not a cautionary historical reference. It is a live description of the present. A general officer arrives in Washington as a person of modest means. He retires within a few years as a multimillionaire. The mechanism is not complicated. He supported the right programs, endorsed the right procurement decisions, provided political cover for the right defense contractors, and was rewarded accordingly. Good job, General. You killed enough of the right people. Here is your board seat. This revolving door does not reform itself. The people who would have to dismantle it are the people who benefit most from its existence. What I believe will ultimately happen, and I say this not with any satisfaction, but with assessment of someone who has spent decades studying how America goes to war and how America leaves, is that after the next attempted campaign against Iran, which will fail, we will do what we did after Vietnam. We will leave. We will say we accomplished what we set out to accomplish. We will not examine the failure publicly for years. There will be so much disorder inside the United States, economic, political, social, that the American people will say, come home, stop spending money we don't have on wars we cannot win. Fix what is broken here at home. And they will be right to say it. Israel understands this trajectory better than anyone, which is precisely why the pressure to continue and to escalate is so relentless. A sudden American military withdrawal from the region would almost certainly mark the end of the Israeli state as it currently exists. Israeli leadership is aware that it is in its 11th hour, a few minutes before midnight. That is why Netanyahu insists publicly that only he will decide when this war ends. That is why he is demanding that enriched uranium be physically removed. His words, you go in and take it out. That is the best way. There is still work to be done. He is not prepared to accept any outcome short of Iran's destruction, because from his perspective, anything less than that leaves Israel facing the same strategic reality it faces today, with American political will increasingly exhausted and American public support for Israel collapsed from roughly 70 to 80% down to somewhere around 20% or less. That is a staggering shift. And Netanyahu knows it. I told a gathering of senior Israeli military officers in 2020 that Iran was not the existential threat they should be focused on. There was a possibility, a narrow one, but real, of some kind of arrangement that served both Iranian and Israeli interests. The difference between Shiite Iran and the Sunni Muslim world matters enormously to understanding regional dynamics. And Iran, despite the hostility of recent decades, is not by nature an aggressive martial power. It is a civilizational state. It does not seek regional conquest. It has not sought it for 1,000 years. The greater long-term threat to Israel, which I tried to communicate in 2020, is Turkey, a country with genuine neo-Ottoman aspirations, now being codified into law through the Blue Homeland Doctrine, a direct legal challenge to the existing Mediterranean order. Turkey and Egypt together represent something Israel has never adequately reckoned with. Two powerful Muslim states with a shared strategic interest in a fundamentally different regional order. And Egypt, the largest Arab country in the world, the largest Sunni Muslim country in the Middle East, has watched what Israel has done to its neighbors. You cannot call entire peoples subhuman and animals and then expect them to remain permanently passive. Israel had a chance to make different choices. That window is not yet fully closed, but it is closing. The lesson that Washington seems constitutionally incapable of absorbing is simply this. We do not live in the Middle East. We do not live in Europe. We do not live in Central Asia or Africa. We can project force into those regions. We cannot sustain presence there indefinitely against the resistance of the people who actually live there. When we leave, and we will leave, others will fill the space. Russia, Turkey, China, regional powers pursuing regional interests. That is not a catastrophe. That is the natural order of geography reasserting itself. The catastrophe is what we will have spent, what we will have destroyed, what we will have sacrificed in American lives, and American treasure, and American credibility, in the attempt to prevent something that was always going to happen eventually. If Eisenhower were president today, none of this would be happening. If Kennedy were president, none of this would be happening. They understood something that has been systematically forgotten in the decades since. Military force without coherent strategy is not power. It is just expensive destruction. And the destruction we are contemplating has a price tag, visible and hidden, immediate and generational, that the American people are only just beginning to understand. The trap is closing. We built it ourselves, and we walked into it with our eyes wide open.